welcome to the workshop. It's called Bootstrapping with Mental Capital, and it's going to be led by Benjamin Syne, who also happens to be CEO and founder of DogSync. Now, just a small fact about a couple small facts about DogSync. It started less than 2 years ago, and it already won the title of the best new startups in Montreal. So that's amazing. And the rest, here's Benjamin Syne. Okay.
Morning, guys. Like I said, I'm Ben. I'm really excited to be here. I hope none of you are too hungover. It is Saturday. But I have some exciting stuff planned for you. So, like I said, I'm the founder and CEO of DogSync. And DogSync is a company that builds the world's first task management application for dog owners. So what does that mean? Well, if you're a group of people that look after a dog, like a family, for example, it's really, really important to know who fed the dog last and when, who walked the dog last and when, and having that information stops key problems from happening. You don't want the dog to miss on the floor or be fed twice. So we created a streamlined way to communicate these things. Essentially, we identified the core tasks that are performed every single day for the dog, and each one of them has an assigned button. So if you need to tell everybody that you walk the dog, you simply hit the walk button. That sends a message to everybody at the same time saying, for example, Ben walked Winston at 6:30 p.m. That information goes to a shared calendar that everybody can access for reference. And alternatively, if you're out giving a talk and you forgot to feed the dog, you can hit the feed request button. Everyone will receive a message saying that you need the dog to be fed, and we handle all the communication, so you'll know who's going to feed the dog and when it actually gets done. And we released a beta version not long ago that did really well. We got 4,000 users in the beta, a really high activity, and that gave us the incentive to go build an in-house team, work on a new version of the product, which is launching really soon. And we'd love to have beta testers. You guys should all have my email, so if you'd love to be a part of that, let me know. And that's the story of DogSync. And I'm especially excited to be talking to you guys today because I actually didn't go to university. I'm what we would call a hackademic. I used self-directed learning techniques outside of the traditional school environment to learn what I needed to as I needed to, using experience as my measuring stick for how well I was doing. And if you're really, really curious about that kind of stuff, you can check out this book. It's got a lot of great info. But today we're talking about bootstrapping with mental capital. Now, in the context of that, I'm talking about building up a buffer of mental fortitude against all of the ups and downs and the fear that you will inevitably feel when either working at a startup or building one. There's a lot to go on. And I thought this quote was very, very appropriate. The mind is a powerful force. It can enslave us or empower us. It can plunge us into the depths of misery or take us to the heights of ecstasy. Learn to use that power wisely. That was important because ideas become things. At a startup, everything you think is important. Being in control of your mental mind state and being able to work like this instead of like, it's going great, it's going shitty, it's going great, it's going shitty, is really, really important. So I've discovered a lot of techniques to help me do this at DogSync, specifically because of something called the dip. So when you start a startup, you come up with your idea, you have this rush of excitement, hopefully. You're going to see all the amazing things it's going to do, how it's going to change the world, how a billion people are going to download it, it's going to make a ton of money, and that's awesome. When this happens, a flood of dopamine is going to rush into your brain. It turns on the learning centers, it gets you super excited, and it's almost like a productivity multiplier. You can often work for 8 to 10 hours straight and get 2 weeks of work done in a single day, which is amazing. But soon after that, the dip. The dip is this long, drawn-out period in the middle, famously named by Seth Godin, who's an author of FANUP. You guys should check out the book. It's called The Dip. But during that time is when you have to build all the really, really difficult things. You have to build your team. You have to articulate your vision. You have to build your product. You have to put together your business model. And during that time, you're going to be wrong a lot. I was wrong a lot. I thought certain things would work, they didn't. I thought certain things would take a certain amount of time, they took way longer. All sorts of things happen during the dip. And this is when fear can really set in. If you don't have an effective way of dealing with the uncertainty that you'll inevitably face, you're never going to reach this peak up here, where Google and Apple are, right? So, just then that's where we want to get. So I came up with a lot of techniques to deal with that, and that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. Because you're all quite well equipped to be in a startup. You're really smart. You've got to university, you're either graduating soon or maybe you already have, and that's great. But there's a small difference between being in school and starting a company. At school, you chose your courses from a list of options. Your teachers give you assignments. You're given deadlines. You're given kind of a framework to work within. But at your startup, no one's going to tell you what to do. You tell you what to do, which sounds awesome, but what if you're wrong? Which you inevitably will be. You're going to come up with a lot of ideas. You're going to try a bunch of different things. It's hard to decide in the first place, but you will make mistakes, and you might end up saying to yourself, is this really going to work? Thoughts like this are dangerous, especially if you believe them too much. And it's because of something that we all have called the subconscious mind. For those of you who aren't familiar with the subconscious mind, only about 5% of your mind is conscious. The part of you that is listening to me right now, or I like to call it the watcher, that is your conscious mind. The rest of it is your subconscious and the unconscious. Some of the things that those do is like keep your heartbeat. Your immune system is functioning right now. There's a billion crazy things happening inside your body right now. They're all run by this intelligence, and that's all the subconscious and the unconscious mind. And it's incredibly powerful, but it also has its issues. It's actually kind of blind. Let me explain that a little bit. Your subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between what is actually happening and what you're thinking. I'll give you an example. You have an exam the next day. You're totally unprepared. I'm sure everyone's been in this situation maybe once or twice. I haven't because I didn't go to university, but I've definitely been in this situation where I thought I was going to screw up what I was going to do the next day. And you may have thoughts where you're like, I'm going to fail this exam, I'm going to screw up this job interview. And when you have those thoughts, the subconscious is kind of dumb. It's like, it doesn't hear, oh, I might fail. It's like, I failed. This is it. It's done. I'm done. And because it controls your body will viscerally react as if those events are transpiring right now. Your heart rate will increase. Your chest can become tight. Your appetite will lower. Physically, your body will react as if those events are happening. Now, that is an issue because the part of your brain that's really smart is in the front. It's called the frontal cortex. And that's where your personality, your creativity, and your intelligence live. But when the subconscious mind is afraid, it triggers this old, part of the brain in the back called the lizard brain. It's a very old part of the brain. Developed a long time ago. It's closer to the spinal cord. And the closer the part of the brain is to the spinal cord, the more veto power it has over the front parts of the brain. And that used to be really useful. The subconscious mind would trigger that part of the brain to trigger something you might be familiar with called the fight-flight responses. And those used to be really important because they protect us. If we were in the jungle and a rhino was charging at us, it would say, get the hell out of here or fight the rhino. And that would keep us alive. But now, we're not in danger very often. We live in Canada. It's a pretty safe place. And you don't need your fight response, but it's still there. So when you think those thoughts, like I'm going to fail that exam, or I might fail that exam, your subconscious will trigger your lizard brain, your fight responses will activate, cortisol level will rise, testosterone levels will lower, and you'll get frozen in your tracks by fear. And that's dangerous because that takes the power away from the smart part of your brain, the part that can learn, the part that can solve problems, the part that is essentially you. But because we no longer have to run away from rhinos, our subconscious mind has had to find another way to protect us. And that comes up in very odd ways because to the subconscious, to be wrong is to die. So, what does that mean? Well, when you have a conversation with somebody at your startup, when you're discussing ideas, and they may disagree with you, you'll oftentimes when you're having these conversations, you maybe feel that your opinion is right. And to the subconscious, if the other person is right, then it's wrong. And it thinks it's in danger. So it will trigger that part of your brain, called the lizard brain, which is going to trigger a fight-fight response. An example of where you might have seen this is road rage. Maybe you're sitting next to your friend who's driving the car and everything's really cool, you're all chilled out. Some guy honks at him, immediately like, "Fuck you, asshole!" You know, it just might happen out of nowhere. I'm sure you've had instances of road rage even yourself. What is going on there? The guy did nothing wrong to you. He didn't threaten your life. He didn't try and kill you. He didn't steal your money. He honked his horn. But in a flash of 1 second, a lot of things happened. Your subconscious, which is watching everything that's going on, saw an event go down where it thought it might be wrong, and so it immediately triggered the lizard brain, and it triggered a flight-fight response that immediately said, "Oh, shit, he's saying I'm doing something wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm going to die, so I have to say something to him to make it that he's wrong, otherwise I'm in danger." And that sounds ridiculous, because it is. We don't need that anymore, but it still has a tremendous amount of power over you. So, those thoughts that are causing that to happen, where do they come from? And are they yours? Because this is something that affects all of us. Well, something interesting about thoughts. On average, a person will have up to 60,000 thoughts a day. Every single one of you is going to have up to 60,000 thoughts a day. And the interesting thing is that we don't have thoughts. Thoughts just happen. The metaphor I like to think about is your brain is almost split into two separate pieces. There's the watcher and the talker. The person listening right now, to me, is the watcher. And think about sitting on a park bench. You're in a beautiful park, you're sitting on a bench. There's a path in front of you, and all manner of things are walking by. People pushing their kids on a stroller, joggers, dogs. Those things are thoughts. They just come by, they just happen. When you think about the last great idea you had, maybe not flash of inspiration. It's not like you were consciously just making that happen. Thoughts just flow in. What happens is the subconscious sees those things, and it can't differentiate whether or not they're happening or not. But the watcher, you, if you're paying close attention, you can actually pick and choose from those thoughts what you want. And while you're doing that, you can also decide that rather than get up and chase those thoughts that are really scaring you, you can stay sitting on the bench, wait till they walk off into the distance, and then go out of sight. So what I'm describing is the act of watching your thoughts, but not saying that they are yours, that they're not you. If you have a thought, it's simply a thought that came to mind, but it's not you. And if it's not a part of you, then somebody disagreeing with it can't put you in danger. Now, the thoughts that do make us afraid have something very odd in common. They're either history or a mystery. I don't know if anybody saw Kung Fu Panda. It's a great movie. There's a great quote from there. I hope you watched it soon. But this little turtle was really, really smart. Because every single one of those thoughts you have that make you afraid have something in common. They're not real. It's either something you're worried about in the past or something you're worried about that might happen in the future. If it happened in the past, it only now exists in your memory. If I said, "Hey, I'd like you to come up here, I'm going to knock you on the head really hard, you're going to get amnesia, forget everything that happened prior to this point," as far as you're concerned now, none of the things that happened to you prior might happen, and none of us were there to remember them, so it only exists in your memory. Now that your memory's gone, that no longer exists. Of course, anything that happens that might happen in the future has not yet happened, so it also doesn't exist. Rarely is it ever that right now there is something that is putting you in a tremendous amount of danger. It's always something you're worried about in the past or something you're worried about that might happen in the future. Of course, those things are not real. How do I know when to back in control? And I just thought this quote was really awesome. thought it had to do with it. So enemy is fear. We think it is hate, but it is fear. Because when you disagree with somebody, or somebody disagrees with you, they hate you. Generally, it's not because they actually hate you. You just probably have a different opinion than them. And their subconscious thinks, well, if their opinion is different, they think they're right. If they're right, I'm wrong, and that will kill me. So they'll defend their opinion or their idea as if their life depended on it. So if somebody ever does get in your face at your startup or anyone else's life, remember, they don't hate you, they're afraid. So we need to know, when is fear back in control? Because if you can't catch it, how can you hope to actually fight it off? I'm going to give you guys a few techniques to actually do that. Pay attention to your body. Because the subconscious controls it, it gives you signs. Physically, you will react differently, and there's a few things you can look for. An elevated heart rate, for example. Tightness in the chest. Shortness of breathing. Your cortisol levels will rise and testosterone levels will go down, which can cause you to have loss of appetite in extreme examples, or eat uncontrollably without really knowing why you're so hungry. And almost in all cases, complete loss of sex drive. So, if you're not feeling horny at all, you might be afraid. There's something to think about. Now, we know how to identify the fear now. There's a few things about it, but now we have to face fear. This is a personal hero of mine, Alex Hannon, and he is a free climber. He's really climbing without a net. And this guy does some of the most insane stuff you will ever see. I encourage you to go look him up on YouTube. He does 3-hour climbs without a rope that normally take other people 2 days. He's one of the top climbers in the world. And he is the epitome of mind over matter. And it's a wonderful metaphor for a startup, because once you start climbing up that rock, it's like starting a startup. There's only 2 ways out. Either you jump off and you die, you fail, or you make it to the top, you succeed. But how does Alex scale these massive cliffs and defeat fear as he's going? Because, in fact, halfway through, often, he has these freak-out moments where he thinks he might fall, or he didn't get his hold right, or something's going wrong. So, we can do what Alex does, because we're rarely ever in as much danger as he is. But he manages to put fear aside and scale massive cliffs. It's about disidentifying with his thoughts. When he is on that cliff and he's afraid, he'll think things like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I didn't think about it straight. I can't get this hold right. When he thinks those things, we now know his subconscious is reacting to that, creating a physical reaction in his body, and it makes him afraid. He starts to shake. His grips aren't as good. His body's reacting. So what does he do? He does something actually very, very simple that we can all do. We're going to do it together now. He observes the breath. So I want everybody to stand up with me. Everyone in the room. We're all together. We're going to take 3 deep breaths in, a 3 count in and a 3 count out. Don't worry about counting. I'm going to give visual signals. All together, I want everybody to take a deep breath in, right? Exhale fully. Inhale, fill the chest with air. And exhale. Inhale the cool, fresh air. Exhale the hot, tense air. Okay, that's very good. You can sit back down. I hope you're all feeling more relaxed. Why observing the breath? Why is that so powerful? There's something interesting about it. When you do controlled breathing, and you really focus, you sit down to just take some deep breaths, count on the way in, count on the way out, when you're focusing on observing your breath, you cannot think. The two, if you're doing it properly, cannot happen in unison. So if cycling those negative thoughts about, oh shit, I might fall, are what's causing the subconscious to react and make you afraid, then having a tool to stop thought breaks that cycle of negative thinking, brings the control from your lizard brain back to your frontal cortex, and allows you to think cleverly about what's my next move, what should I do next, and actually do better. And it has even more benefits than that. In fact, now that we've learned how the subconscious mind reacts to our thoughts, can we not use it the other way around to boost our productivity? The answer is not just yes, it's a resounding yes. And that's what I wanted to get at earlier about being in control of your thoughts. You can use the power of your mind to do anything. So instead of thinking, shit, I'm going to fall, trick your subconscious. Say, I'm going to do such a good job of climbing this cliff. I'm going to do so well on this exam. I got this. I already passed the exam. I did an amazing job. Say these things to yourself. And even if you don't believe it at first, saying it enough, cycling that thought, causes the same series of events to happen. The subconscious can't tell the difference. It thinks those things are really happening. And because of that, your body will viscerally react as if those things are happening. Cortisol levels will drop. Testosterone levels will go up. Your breathing and your heart rate will slow. You'll reach a stable level. Your frontal cortex is back in control. And dopamine floods the brain, which is really useful because it turns on the learning centers of the brain, and on average, you'll get a 30% productivity boost from doing this. If you're curious about the exact mechanisms of it, it's called the happiness advantage. And there's actually an entire book on the topic. But in fact, you can use your subconscious to your advantage. And the best entrepreneurs on the planet, Larry Page, Eric Schmidt, Steve Jobs, these guys all use these techniques. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in fact, Steve Jobs actually went to India for 6 months to a temple and became a Buddhist, learned to meditate. And those techniques of observing the breath served him quite well, building the most valuable company on the planet. So, just to recap with you guys, you need to build up a buffer of mental capital against the fear of failure in a startup. And even if you're just working at one, not just one you co-founded. If you don't, fear will manifest in many different ways, whether it's an argument in a conversation or not being able to think clearly. If it's in control, it will run you. But now we know that it's thoughts that are causing those fears. That's not us. It's just thoughts we're having. We know how to identify when we're afraid. We have a technique for stopping that negative thought cycle that's triggering the fear. And now we know how to use that entire mechanism to our advantage to give us the best chance of success in our careers. Guys, I wanted to thank you for having me today. I encourage you to add me on Twitter and LinkedIn, because I'm going to tweet out the link to a blog post I'm writing about this topic, so you guys can review all the information. I'll have my slides up, so that you can get as much information about it as possible, because I know I went over a lot today. And we're hiring interns, so what are you waiting for? Thank you guys very much. So does anybody have any questions? I went over a lot. Yeah, over there.
Can you give me an example of, within your experience, using this technique with a problem in your startup that you may not have realized was eating at you in the fear scenario?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Where do I start? Well, okay, here's one. Here's a good one. Sometimes you're going to wake up and you're going to have an email in your inbox from a friend that says, hey, have you checked out this company? And he sends you a link to a competitor. Is this on point with what?
Perfect.
Okay, sends you a link. And essentially you're shitting your pants right there. Immediately you're like, oh my God, we're fucked. We weren't fast enough. These guys are gonna eat us alive. Those thoughts immediately get eaten up by your subconscious. You're instantly you're like stressed. You're losing hair. You know, you're in the bathroom. It happens very, very quickly. But actually, in reality, the chances of success of a startup are abysmal. Even if somebody were to steal your idea, they have less than a 5% chance of success. A shit ton of things need to go right in order for them to be able to succeed. And just because they have a similar idea does not mean they have the same vision of you about the future. It's a war. You're going to have to fight for that victory. Just because somebody simply put something on the web, your friend found it, does not mean they beat you. And not just that, in any space, I'm sure you've seen that there's place for many, many competitors. So in those circumstances, when that first happened, those first few times, and actually one of them took the name that we were originally going to name our product. We were going to call it PetSync and do all pets. And we woke up one day and there was a PetSync on the App Store. It didn't do the same thing, but I still had that fear moment. And at first, all the negative things happened. Everything I described about my body physically reacting happened like overdrive. And it's actually my co-founder in the back, Abe, that sat me down, and he was like, what about DogSync? We could just go with DogSync. And I started to calm down. I took some deep breaths. And in the end, DogSync actually ended up being a better name. And guess what happened to PetSync? It's dead. So there was really nothing to worry about. But in that moment, I still probably took about 3 days off of my life by being so stressed. So that's just one example. But I mean, things happen very often where you're gonna freak out. That's why I thought it was important to share these techniques to keep your mind stayed at this level, so you can coast through all the work you have to do instead of being like, yeah, no, yeah. Which is not as fun as it sounds. Roller coasters are better left to theme parks. Okay.
How do you tell the difference of like excitement compared to fear? Sometimes it's the same, like, you know, sometimes you get the same feeling. Like you're excited and your body's going all crazy and you're like, it's very similar to the like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? Like,
that's a great question. How do you, so the question was if anyone can hear very well, how do you tell the difference between excitement and fear? Because oftentimes they show similar responses in the body. Oftentimes, fear really only shows up as two things. It's either flight, where you're like frozen, where you want to run away, or you want to fight. And there's probably like a little bit of like anger there. You might feel a little angry. Excitement, at least in my circumstances, generally drives me to do something. They may react like similarly physically within the body, but if you, for example, get an email that says, we'd love for you to come speak at this conference or interview with this company, we looked at your portfolio online, they look amazing, we think you're the right person for the job. There will be a lot of excitement, and a little bit of fear will be mixed in, because you'll, of course, have those small doubts that, oh, maybe, maybe I'm not as good as they think I am. They put me up on a pedestal. So oftentimes, they will maybe even show up in tandem. But, and you know what, in fact, maybe always, because, it's things are not as black and white as we like to describe them. So I'm glad you brought up this point. In that circumstance, when I described, I'd be really excited and maybe a little bit afraid. But pay attention to your body. Which one feels like it's winning out? Are you so afraid that you're like shaking? Are you feeling like a bit sick to your stomach? Is it making you freeze? Because if it's making you freeze, that's a lot more fear than it is excitement. Being next in line to go on an amusement park ride, or being in the front of the stage when you're seeing your favorite band, that's exciting and maybe a little bit scary, because like, oh, Adam Levine might like pull me up on stage. But it's always going to be circumstantial, and that's why it's important to remain in control, be the watcher, and pay very close attention. And use the breathing technique. If you breathe, and the fear subsides, and the excitement's still there, you know it's exciting. I hope that helped. It's a good question. It's a tough one. Rarely do people give me questions that I have to ponder about while I answer. So.
Sorry.
No, excellent job. That's how Q&A should be. Any other questions?
So when you're hiring someone, how do you use your knowledge about their mental capacity to influence that hiring process?
It's a great question. So on the topic of hiring, it's tough to know if people can deal with the stress of at a startup, but I'm also the one who's probably going to cause them the stress. So I'm the boss. If my engineer's not finishing things on time, and I call them up and I yell at them about it, I'm going to cause a situation where, like, to his mind, I'm saying I'm right. If I'm right and he's wrong, he's going to defend his opinion as if it's not dependent on it, which is oftentimes why in corporations, departments blame other departments for delays. There's one guy in charge of each department, and if the design department sees the delay, it's the engineering department's fault. The engineering department's like, it's the design department's fault. They made it too hard. So, you know, like, part of it is that you have to make the environment non-triggering to those things, because everybody has that built in. So it's important to keep that in mind. Like, even myself, I have moments all the time where I slip away, like I slip and I get really stressed out and I forget the things that I'm talking about with you today. And other people will remind me at my startup, like, hey, take a deep breath. So it's not really something you can screen for. It's not something that, you know, it's either you can deal with the pressure or you can't. You need to actually explain these things to your employees and actually see how they respond to it. You can, of course, put you know, potential new hires in very stressful environments, give them really tough things to do, and see how they do it. But I tend not so much to use this as a basis for hiring. I actually try and match people based on contrasting personality types. Is anybody familiar with the Myers-Briggs test? You all had to do it. So you can have people do that for free on 16personalities.com. I'm an ENFP, if anybody knows what that means. So I tend to actually screen more for this, and I match teams based on that. So my lead engineer is an ENFP, but the engineer that he works with at the back end is an INTJ. And they have perfectly contrasting personality types. Whereas Adam, the ENFP, or lead iOS engineer, our CTO, is very outgoing. He's a very good public speaker. He's very sociable and can also code. You know, obviously not as good at practical tasks, but he's a great people's person, so he manages the team really well. Whereas Enoch, who's an INTJ, you know, he's a little more in the shell. He's not as much of an outgoing person, but he's a planner. He's a strategic person. He's writing everything down. He has a way of doing everything. He's got a structured system built always. So, in short, I don't really screen for those things. It's kind of something you need to see in action. You know, one of the hires that I had once in marketing, as soon as anything went wrong, she would freak out. And I can only learn that after the fact. And generally, whenever we hire somebody, we have like a 3-month probationary period. That's kind of like the best thing that I can use to really see in action, because of course in an interview people will tell you what you want to hear. I've done that. So in the example of that marketing officer that had the issue, when she was working on our website, she accidentally deleted the website just after finishing it. And she like looked over, she's like, oh my god, I deleted the website. And I just looked over and I'm like, that's okay. She's like, oh my god, thank you for not freaking out. I was like, well, yeah, like, it's all stuff we had saved, we could just put it right back up. I'm sure it's back up. But, you know, like, little things like that are telling. You know, like, in her mind, very quickly flash, like, I deleted the website, I'm not good enough, this is wrong, I'm wrong, freak out. You know, like, that happens all very quickly. It's in the flash of a second. and getting good at paying attention to your thoughts and disidentifying them is a practice. So give your employees the tools and then see how they use them. And if they can't get it soon enough, of course you do have to worry about your burn rate, so get rid of it. But I mean, that's kind of like the best I can really do. I don't have a magical catch-all for
What about everyday life? Is there something particular you want to tell us about the dip? So at the beginning you talked about
Yes.
the dip, which is a big period of time, I guess. So it's not a day-to-day action, thinking about how to recover from current thought. But during the dip, which is a long period, it's probably a lot more tougher to pass through because the thoughts continuously coming back and coming. You have some special tips for that?
So let me make sure I understand the question. So you're asking if I have some special techniques specific to that period of time called, let's go back to it,
Yeah.
that help get through this point. So specific, just make sure I understand, related to what I'm talking about, know if I have things that I do specifically during this period.
Yes, because it's long period of institution.
You're not talking about deep breaths that take a few seconds, and he's talking about a month.
Yeah.
Right. You know what? I actually, so speaking about the dip, there's a couple of things. I told you guys about a few deep breaths, but it's actually better if you turn it into a practice. Every single morning, the first thing I do before I go to work is I meditate for anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, whatever amount of time it takes for you to really reach a calm certain state of mind. Because if you can't go into work every day letting your lizard brain control you. If you do, you're going to start fights or disagreements with colleagues. You're going to make irrational decisions. So during this point especially, and really here and here, it can never stop because excitement can steer you wrong too. I actually meditate every single morning. It's not just when I'm stressed. Every single morning. When I'm with my team, we actually will often do the same thing. Before we sit down to discuss new marketing techniques or figure out roadmap, we'll put on a guided meditation track. Literally, I'll lie down on the floor together, which is also a fun team building exercise. Get some close. And just breathe and get into that serene mental state. I like to call it clearing the RAM because I'm a techie. If anybody knows a lot about computers here, we model computers after the human brain. RAM, when you have too many things running on your computer, it starts to slow down, it doesn't work properly. So it's not just about when you're freaking out, clear that. It's literally, if you can, every morning with your team, clear out the RAM, allow yourself a lot of mental space to move around within, and give the power back to your frontal cortex. So you're having discussions, intelligent discussions, not arguing about my opinion versus yours. I was like, opinions don't matter. At the end of the day, you're going to have to go test those assumptions with data. So, you could say you're right to blue in the face, but that's just going to slow things down. And I've made that mistake in the past, and it has. So, if your employee says something to you, don't say that you're wrong, because you can't know if it is. Just be like, that's interesting, let's test it. So, really, that same practice. I meditate every single day. I'm with my team. We get a calm state first before we discuss, and that helps avoid these things like just manifesting within your startup and tearing it apart from the inside out. Yeah, we're running a little short on time. Can we take one or two more questions? Okay.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what you did before you started your company, and kind of what motivated you to start your own company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that one pretty quick. So, been a musician for 13 years, play guitar. So that was something I did for a long time, but that led me into the media field. When I started a startup previously called Syne Productions, and we did video photography, design, marketing, consulting. Actually, most notably in 2012, we ran all media for the JSN International Case Competition, which is run there at John Molson. And while I was doing that, my family actually got a dog. And we're 6 people, and we thought it was going to be really easy because we could split up the tasks between us. It was math that ended up being wrong. And when we had the dog, and we lived this problem every single day, and we tried everything else under the sun, eventually it clicked in our heads, like, well, it'd be great if there was an app for this, but it didn't exist. It was something I was really passionate about and thought I could solve, and that led me to where I am now. Well, do I have enough time for one more?
If it's a short one, sure.
Is it a really short one?
Just wondering about the future, because it seems like what you guys are doing with DogSync could just as easily be called Project Sync, where like you work on projects, you have to do these things. So the engine there, is there any plans to like move from dogs, use it to like all kinds of pets and then projects and like anything like that?
That is a good question, but not a short answer. So you got my card. If you want to ask me some more questions about it, let me know. The short answer is we do have plans for the future. And I guess that's my time. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.